Hi,
Guys,
Lisa, thank you so
hi.
much for, honestly, I'm so grateful. Thank you for running to a location to do this. I know you've got a lot to do. And, by the way, okay, I've got so many questions, but I'm only going to keep you for about 15 minutes, Lisa, because I
Yeah.
know you got a lot going on. So, what was the reaction in the courtroom when when Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts?
Well, let me walk you through sort of the incredible plot twist because it was incredibly dramatic, very quiet all afternoon, and about 4:15, Judge Merchan comes back to the bench and he announces to the court, and the jury's not there. He announces to the court, "You know what, guys? I'm going to dismiss the jury today at 4:30." So we're looking at our watches. We're like, "All right, we're going home. No verdict." And then he leaves. And we get to 4:30 and there's no Judge Merchan. And at about 4:36, Judge Merchan comes back and says, I spoke to the jury. They have reached a verdict. They say they want another 30 minutes to fill out some paperwork and then we will read the verdict. And so again, it's like, what record scratch? Because we were all packing up ready to go home.
You're
And
like,
we all get into position and you can, yes. And we get into position and we're all sort of like with our hands above our keyboards, ready to waiting to see what is going to happen. And it's this incredibly dramatic thing, somber, solemn. This is a serious thing for the nation, for him, and for all of us. And they come in, and we have very rarely heard the jurors' voices, and this is the foreperson, and he's got a slight Irish twang, and they said, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, we have." They go to, and they go down each count, and it's
right.
count one, guilty, count two, guilty, on and on till 34, and you could just feel this kinetic feeling in the room, like, is this happening? And there you go, and boom. And then afterwards they say to each juror, "Do you agree with this verdict?"
Right.
And each one said
And do
yes.
they
And
say that for all 34 verdicts? They all have to go around the
no,
queue?
no,
No,
they
but
say you
after
have
it's
found.
all done.
After it's all done, they say either the foreman is the only person who answers. On count one, what does the jury find? Guilty. On count two, and the foreman. And then at the end, they say the jury has found the defendant guilty on all 34 counts. And they go to each juror individually. Juror number one, do you agree with that? Yes. And so it's rock solid. They're all in agreement that this is how they have found the defendant. And then the jury has to file out right in front of Donald Trump, which is, again, incredibly dramatic. So they file out right in front of the man that they just found guilty of
So they
34 counts.
have to actually physically pass him when they leave the courtroom?
Yes, that is what happened today. So then,
Okay, I
the
want to
jury,
know what was their affect? I mean, what were their facial expressions? I heard one person say they looked down the whole time and looked at the judge, but during when they were saying guilty 34 times, or when the foreman was saying that,
well, I was in the overflow
no,
room. I was in the overflow room, and again, they don't have the camera on their faces in the jury box.
mm,
So we could see them passing Donald Trump, but we couldn't see, we could just hear the audio. And in fact, they had a lot of technical glitches, which was extremely frustrating. So there were moments where it was catching and we're like, this is the most important thing of the whole trial. Please get it fixed. But so we couldn't see I couldn't see their reactions as the 34 counts were being read, but you could see them filing past, which was incredibly awkward and somber. So then the jury's out and Blanche gets up, Todd Blanche,
the
Donald
defense
Trump's
attorney.
defense attorney gets up and says, "We move to acquit and you're like, wait, what? And on the grounds that he claims that there's no way the jury could have come to this conclusion without relying heavily on Michael Cohen's testimony, and the defense, believe that Michael Cohen perjured himself. And of course, Steinglass, the lead prosecutor, stands up and says, "We disagree with that." And Merchan says, "Your request for an acquittal is denied." So they move past that. So then they get on to when is he going to be sentenced? And Blanche makes this really interesting comment. He wants it to be in 6 weeks, in mid to late July, because the Mar-a-Lago case in Florida, the documents case, the classified documents case, has a hearing in late June that's going to require them, counsel, and remember, Todd Blanche, who was the lead defense attorney here, is also the lead defense attorney there. He said, "I'm going to have to be preparing for that Mar-a-Lago case, and that's going to require me to be in what's called a SCIF." And for people who are listening, a SCIF is like a bulletproof little room that you go in when you're dealing with very sensitive classified documents. And he said, "I'm not going to have time to prepare for the sentencing can I have mid to late July? And the prosecutor stands up and says, you know what, we're fine with that. That's roughly the right, time
Really?
length.
I was going
Yes.
to say, I
Well,
mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, but do the lawyers get to determine when sentencing takes
no,
place?
the judge decides. So the prosecution gets to weigh in. And the prosecution said, the standard time is about 6 weeks. That's roughly mid to late July. That's fine. And Mershon set it for July 11th. And that is 4 days before the Republican National Convention. So that will be an interesting week. Circle
Let's
it in
talk
red in
about,
your calendar.
July 11th. And Lisa, since you mentioned that, and again, I'm going to be talking to Neil Katyal in a minute, and he'll be able to
And
talk
he's
about the
a
legal
lawyer,
stuff.
and he's
And I don't
on
want
the
to put
Mount
you in
Rushmore
that
of lawyers.
position, but the judge will basically decide on the sentencing, and
Yes.
he's got a number of options, doesn't he?
Yes. And if you're going to ask
Do
me what all those options are, that's a question for Neil.
Okay, I'll talk to Neil because I know he has the option to have him be on probation, prison time, but you know what? We'll save that for
That's
Neil.
really a question for Neil. But I'll tell you, the morning was really interesting too, because yesterday there was this drama at the end of the day. The jurors passed the judge a note and said, we want you to read back the jury instructions. And for anyone who's wondering why they don't just have the jury instructions, which are really dense and technical, written down on a piece of paper, it's a state law, it's not allowed, which is really weird and quirky. So what they wanted read back to them today was the jury instructions around how do you think about inference. And they specifically said that in the jury instructions, Judge Mershon had used this interesting metaphor as a way to think about inference. And the metaphor had to do with rain. And he said, imagine you go to sleep at night and it's not raining. And you wake up in the morning and the sidewalk is wet and you see people walking around with umbrellas and raincoats. You can reasonably infer that it rained while you were sleeping. And that is predicated on the facts of the sidewalk being wet and the people carrying umbrellas and the people wearing, and that is inference. And that when you are thinking about, you don't want to speculate, but you want to infer things, you have to think about reason and common sense and your lived experience.
Wow.
And it's interesting that this thing that took an hour for the day before for the jury instructions were long, that was one of the things that they specifically said, say that again. That was very interesting.
So I guess what were they? Can you speculate on what they were speculating?
And another thing that they were curious about and wanted read back to them, and we know that also the pieces of the transcripts that they wanted read back to them, which by the way was a moment of great pure humor because Judge Mershon reads aloud the jury instructions, the rain metaphor, but when you're reading back the testimony. And so they had to read back the testimony of David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, and Michael Cohen, the former fixer. They don't get Michael Cohen. They don't get David Pecker. They use these two female court reporters who sweetly had these New York accents. So you're reading the male prosecutor, his questions, and it's a female voice with a New York accent. And then you're reading David Pecker's response with a female voice and a New York accent. It was very sweet and human because of course this is a human experience in addition to a very important legal and existential.
But don't they have a transcript of all the testimony? Why do they have to hear it?
But my understanding is that it was important for it to be read back, and perhaps they don't. But the other, so that was really fun and funny that they were reading back. But the nature of the 4 pieces of the transcript that they wanted read back to them spoke to this idea of what was Donald Trump's intention? Because one of the pieces of the jury instruction that they wanted read back to them as well had to do with accomplices. And this idea that just being in the room where someone is plotting a murder, they didn't use that word, but just being in the room where someone is plotting a crime doesn't make you a co-conspirator. Where is the line between being in the room where it happened, when something bad was being planned, and being part of that plan, being one of the chefs? And that sort of, and again, this is a great question for Neil, that sort of legal fuzziness was something they came back and said, could you read that to me again? I need to get a little bit clearer about that. Where's the line in terms of how I decide whether someone was just in the room where it happened and it wasn't their fault that they were standing there, and or one of the chefs masterminding this all. But the other thing that they asked for that was really curious, and we didn't know it until this morning, they asked for headphones. And that's interesting because they wanted headphones that they could plug into the laptop. They were given a laptop that was just packed with all the evidence. No Wi-Fi, so they couldn't Google anything. And that was really important because if there's any question that they could Google something, that could be a grounds for an appeal or a mistrial down the road. This is a dead laptop, basically, just packed with evidence. And the fact that they asked for headphones says that they intended to listen to the pieces of the evidence that were audio. And what were the pieces of the evidence that were audio? We don't know exactly what they were interested in, but we do know which audio pieces of evidence they had. And
wait, it was what? Hold on.
Recordings, for instance, that includes the recordings that Michael Cohen made of Donald Trump, where they were allegedly trying to hash out how the payment would go and whether it would be in cash, and Michael Cohen saying, oh, no, it cannot be in cash. So these recordings that were kind of
that implicated Donald Trump as having full knowledge of this arrangement.
Yes, and so this little, what seemed sort of like an innocuous, throwaway, like they want some headphones. Actually, at the time, we were like, again, record scratch, like, why do they want headphones? That tells you, it seemed like a clue as to which part of this humongous tsunami of evidence they may have been paying attention to. So anyway, it was a heck of a day.
Yeah,
so
Lisa,
that was the morning.
Sorry, can I ask you a couple questions? I mean, I think it's interesting. He really did have a jury of his peers. This was quite a cross section of New Yorkers. I understand the jury had a couple of lawyers, some business executives, right? Tell us a little bit about the makeup of the jury itself.
7 men, 2 women, 5 women, 2 lawyers. But they weren't criminal lawyers. They were like corporate lawyers. There was one man who got up and he was retired. He'd been in finance and he talked about what an incredible and robust meditation practice he has in the morning. We're like, that'll come in handy. But yeah, young people who were familiar. There was one woman on the jury who talked very glowingly about Donald Trump and that, she respected some of the things that he did and said when he was president. And so you had a real, I think, racial, gender, socioeconomic, age, very diverse. Really, just very diverse.
People. You were in the overflow. I'm curious how people reacted, even in the overflow room. I know you've been near Andrew Giuliani on some days.
I was seated next to a Fox correspondent when the news came in. And it's, and the security officials came in the room and said, we don't want you to overreact. Keep it together. And look, the press wasn't going to do that anyway. We're too busy to have wild reactions to this. But, it was very somber. I mean, this is history. There's no getting around that. I think everyone, no matter whether you're working for, progressive, liberal, or conservative, this is history. This was somber. And again, we thought we were going home. And so you were like, wait, what? Record scratch? Here it is. And then it was like, boom, boom, boom.
I just got out of the shower and the TV said a verdict has been reached. And I was like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
So I think it took everyone by surprise. Now, Donald Trump's lawyers can automatically appeal this, can they not, Lisa?
Yes. And again, this is stuff for Neil because I'm not a lawyer, but that is my understanding. Yes. And so look, this is going to be a process. And I don't quite know what's going to come next in terms of appeals, but yeah.
Okay. Hold on 2 seconds. I'm getting a lot of questions, but I'm going to save them for Neil. Lisa, do you think any of the jurors will do interviews?
Yes.
Have they been?
Do. I don't know. I don't know.
Because I know there were a lot of security concerns. We talked about that oncology nurse whose name was out there, and I think
not her name, but her sort of some of defining characteristics. Right. But I'll tell you, Mershon made a really interesting speech at the end. He said, every single day you've been in here, I have given you admonitions saying, don't Google the case, don't talk to your friends, don't, try to research it. And today, I'm not giving you any admonitions. If you feel that you want to talk about this case, you are free to do that. And if you feel that you don't want to talk about this case, you are free to do that too. It is your choice. I think that's a verbatim. And then, because he's such a lovely person and you could feel the bond between the jury and the judge, He said, and after I have a little business to clean up here, which included setting the sentencing date. But afterwards, I want you to wait because I want to talk to you a little bit about what this experience was like for you. And I want your feedback about what we could do better for jurors.
Oh, how interesting.
And I think, again, putting aside what has been said by some people about this judge, I think that speaks for itself about this individual, Judge Merchan's, character and true compassion and desire to protect the sanctity of this process and to make other Americans take this process of serving on a jury very seriously and not be afraid to do it and know that there are judges like him who will protect them.
Lisa, before we go, I want to ask you one sort of just your opinion on something. Do you think this will change any minds politically? Because, I was reading something, I think it was CNN's Reliable Sources newsletter, and they were characterizing, I kind of switch around when I am watching cable news, but honestly, I get most of my news these days from my phone. And the way Fox News and other right-wing media outlets have been characterizing this whole trial is a complete alternative universe and an alternate universe and such a different narrative. Given that he has been convicted of a felony, and by the way, that makes you ineligible to be a member of Congress and ineligible for many other jobs in this country. Do you think voters will be impacted by this? I'm curious, or do you even feel comfortable?
It's a really good question. And in fact, just today, because we had a long stretch sitting after the morning session, just sitting and reading our email, and there was a poll that came through that sort of indicated that it's a pretty small slice of Americans who told this particular poll that the outcome, guilty or not guilty, would change their mind. But we don't know. I think it's not only do we not know, I think it's unknowable.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we don't know. You don't know. There's anyone who tells you that they know, they're fooling themselves. But I think it's a little unknowable. I think that it's possible people themselves don't know.
Sorry, I have one more question. Did you get any sense, or did you talk to anyone who was actually in the courtroom about President Trump's reaction to the verdict? I know he was there with his son, Eric. He was sitting behind him. Did he seem shocked? I know the prosecution had virtually no reaction, or at least that's what I heard. What about the president himself? Have you heard anything about that?
I'll be honest, I don't know. And what the sort of atmospherics that I'll share with you is that it was sort of like an eruption after it all happened. And, they were like, clear the court, they were sort of hustling us out of there. And even just getting out of the court, there are helicopters, there are big crowds. It's very noisy. I'm still right here. I'm like a block away. And so it was arguably more chaotic than it's been, and it's been pretty chaotic. So I don't feel that I got a good look because it was unusually chaotic.
I don't know whether he said this verbally or put it out on Truth Social that they were going to uphold the Constitution. This was a travesty, that kind of thing. He was very belligerent and very, I can't think of the right word, but very insistent that this was, an American injustice, basically.
I'll be honest, you know how it is when you're in the field and you're sort of running from place to place. I'm like, I don't feel qualified to say because I've literally just,
because he has basically said we're going to defend the U.S. Constitution, and I think this is part of the strategy to really run against the legal system as well. So
and I would also say it's something that you and I talked about the last time we spoke, which is this isn't the end. Not only are there going to be appeals, but this is just throwing a pebble or maybe a big rock or a boulder into a pool of water, and they're going to be like just lots of ripples from this, and we don't know how that's going to play out in the political sphere, in people's minds. We don't know, but it's going to be an interesting couple days.
One of my followers asked if anything is being done to protect the jurors in
You know
this
what? This
question
is
section.
an excellent question, and I don't know, and I'm about to run off and try to find out. That's like literally
Okay.
what I'm about to run off and go do. But I like
Well,
ran over here to talk to you and
thank
put my
you. I
stuff
want
down
to
and go
let
to the
you go
bathroom and
because
go back
I
out.
know I know you've got stuff to do. Lisa, thanks so much.